With all the huge fights going on recently, the UFC's been having a field day. But now they're caught up in what's probably their biggest to date. Betting on fights is definitely not something new, but it might have gotten out of hand this time. In today's video, we're breaking down exactly what's happened in the UFC world recently, and just how serious it could get. First off, how exactly did it all start? The UFC is known for being the best in the business when it comes to mixed martial arts, and they've had a pretty decent reputation in the past few years. But now, all that peace seems to have been disturbed since the organization is dealing with the biggest since it started over 2 decades ago. The names you've probably heard floating around are James Krause and Darrick Minner, and you might be wondering exactly how they're related in the situation and what even happened. Today, we're breaking it all down for you, right from where it started to where it's going. Like most messes on the internet, all of this started with social media. In August 2022, James Krause appeared on Ariel Helwani's MMA podcast. Krause is the head coach at the Glory Gym in Missouri, focusing on MMA with his students, while Helwani is a famous sports journalist. It was obvious to everyone why Krause had shown up on the podcast. One of his students, Brandon Moreno, had recently tasted some success when he won a UFC interim title, and it was all thanks to his coach, so naturally, he wanted to come and talk about it. But that wasn't all he talked about, and that's where the trouble started. Coaching wasn't his only job. Krause also had a little side hustle with MMA gambling. He spilled all about his Discord channel, where he would reveal betting tips to help his subscribers out. Some of them even paid up to $2,000 for his service, which included him taking over people's accounts and placing bets himself. In fact, he'd ended up making more money in gambling than he had as a coach. But wait, who exactly is this guy? If you're not a UFC superfan, it's likely that you don't remember James Krause or even know him at all. The 36-year-old is in the business of coaching now, but up until recent years, he was a fighter himself, and he had a great 28-8 career record. In fact, his final 8 fights gave him an insane 7-1 record, so he definitely went out with a bang. Krause was mostly a lightweight and welterweight fighter throughout his career, but his name wasn't ever at the very top of the rankings. He never made it to those big spots, but he did face off against some of the sport's biggest names, including Jorge Masvidal, Donald Cerrone, and Michael Johnson. But he's not really well known for his UFC career, because it's clear that his strengths lie more in teaching the sport than actually taking part in it. You know what they say, coaches don't play, and this coach is definitely better off for not playing. He owns Glory MMA and Fitness in Missouri, and is also the chief coach at the gym. He's a UFC and Bellator regular, and some of his students have gone on to some pretty insane success. One of them just happens to be Brandon Moreno, the ex-UFC champion, who might be credited for starting off the whole mess, and the Bellator big shot, James Gallagher. Now, let's talk about that fight. One of the biggest parts of this whole was an infamous fight involving one of Krause's students, and the weirdest part is that it only took 67 seconds to start things off. Things got shady when a fight was lined up between one of Krause's students, Darrick Minner, and Shayilan Nuerdanbieke, at a UFC event in Las Vegas. This was back in November, and things got weird before the fight even started. In the beginning, all the bets had been on Minner to win, but right before the fight started, all the bets shifted to support of his opponent instead. The fight started, and Minner immediately threw a kick with his left leg. It may have been a standard move, but it didn't work out well for the guy, since he looked like he was in pain rein and grabbed at his knee. He tried kicking again with the same leg, but Nuerdanbieke had already caught on, and he managed to finish off the fight with a victory. And yes, all of this happened in 67 seconds. Immediately, fans started wondering if something deeper had happened. It looked like Minner had already known he had an injury on his leg, and he'd still gone into the fight anyway. That would mean someone had tipped the bettors off at the very last minute. And obviously, the blame went directly to Krause, though no one really said it out loud. The UFC immediately put out an announcement saying that there would be an investigation carried out by Don Best Sports, their betting integrity partners. So what happened after all this? Clearly, something bigger was happening underneath all this stuff, and people had caught on even before the investigation actually ended. Just a few weeks after the fight, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario banned all betting on MMA contests. And that was only the start of a lot of stuff about to happen. Dana White, the president of the UFC, spoke out about the whole thing as well, saying that he had zero worries about everything. He said that everyone already knew about the betting guidelines in UFC, and that it wasn't a big enough deal for everyone to freak out over it. He reminded everyone that there was a chance that his fighters would go to federal prison if they were actually convicted, which would be a huge mess for literally everyone involved. It looked like he just wanted to shut the whole thing down right away. So what did the authorities do? Well, right after it all happened, the Nevada State Athletic Commission stepped in. They're the guys that oversee all the UFC events in Vegas, and they let Krause know instantly that his cornering license was suspended, and it would stay that way until the investigation ended. Things only got much worse for Krause from that moment. The UFC later announced that Minner had been released from his contract, and Krause was banned from cornering or even attending future UFC events. In fact, anyone who trained with him wouldn't be allowed to continue their UFC career unless they completely cut him off. Plus, what did the other regulators do about it? Obviously, the hurricane didn't stop at just the UFC. We've already talked about how the Ontario authorities reacted, and that was because they felt like the UFC just wasn't doing enough in its policies about betting. It also has to be said that they only said this about the UFC. The ban didn't count for Bellator or the Professional Fighting League. Next, the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement told their betting partners that they were no longer allowed to accept bets on fights that were linked to Krause in any way at all. This was still less than what Ontario did, but it was enough to make a statement against Krause. Canada was definitely taking it seriously, because after Ontario, Alberta quickly followed suit, with the Alberta Gaming, Liquor, and Cannabis Agency temporarily banning gambling in the province too. However, they lifted the ban right after everyone else banned Krause from ever coming near the ring again. So that's Canada, the UFC, and Nevada down. What was left? Well, the Bellator president, Scott Coker, also decided to give his thoughts about the whole thing, saying that he doubted he'd ever see Krause at a Bellator event again. He called it totally unacceptable, and he mentioned that he knew the legal side of things was going to be cleared up soon. But even before that part was done, he already thought it was too big of a deal just to let slide, since it ruined the chances of people who'd been putting in effort for years. Next, let's talk about what this could mean for everyone involved. Obviously, the whole is a huge deal, and there's no way to know just how serious it's going to get for everyone involved in it. But it isn't looking good for anyone, because Krause has basically said goodbye to his whole career, and the UFC has the authorities involved. Ex-fighter Josh Thompson revealed that the authorities authorities had seized things like laptops and tablets in Krause's house, and they were going to carry out a bunch of searches to see if he was actually violating the law. That might spell out some actual jail time for the guy. On his Weighing In podcast, Thompson explained the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, which Krause could be found in violation of. He actually even compared it to insider trading and said it could be compared to fraud as well, which just made things sound even worse. Thompson was basically reminding everyone that things were way more serious than everyone thought so, and that soon enough, everyone would start turning each other in. For the UFC itself, it's clear that making betting so chill in the past few years is coming back to haunt them. This could lead to an overall ban on betting, which might make the UFC lose out on a ton of fans and viewers who only watched so they could place bets on the fight. Finally, it looks like Dana is more worried than before. The UFC president might have said he had no worries when the news first came out, but it looks like he's taking that statement back. The UFC 282 controversy is the latest event in the whole situation, specifically the fight between Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon. It looked like Gordon had it in the bag, right up until the judge changed his decision. When someone asked White his thoughts on the whole situation, his response was completely different, saying fight fixing is actually a huge concern for him, and that he keeps reminding the fighters to stay away from gambling. Looks like he's a little more worried than he said when things started off, which means things might be getting serious. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Krause is guilty? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.